Well, we're still in the book of Ruth there, Henry. This is Pastor Doug. Why don't you tell us where we're going? You're in the other studio. Give them the clue, man.
20 to the end, right? 2:20 to the end, I think, of chapter 2, and I titled it Harvest in God's Field.
Okay, yeah. Okay, God's Feeding Station people out there, if you've been listening to this thing, you know where we're at, you know what we're doing, you know why we're doing it. If you haven't, figure it out, man. God'sFeedingStation.org. No, I'm kidding.
Figure it out.
Did download the app? What did you
clue,
say the other
man.
day?
Come on.
I said, send us some money and get over it. And you said money. Send alcohol.
And yeah, both showed up on my desk.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I'm okay with that.
I was thinking about how Boaz has been sharing. Did you share any of that alcohol that showed up?
Yeah, I gave you a bottle.
That's right.
Reluctantly, but I gave you a bottle.
Because I didn't know 2 bottles showed up. That's pretty funny.
2 bottles did show up. I said, I said to the person who gave it to us, I said, I'm going to give the pastor a choice. He can have the money or he can have the wine, but he's not getting both.
Not getting both.
Nope.
Yeah, and not all pastors would be willing to take the wine. So I'm looking at Ruth here, and Boaz actually had recommended that Ruth take her bread and dip it in the wine. Mm-hmm. That he had. It was the Hebrew word is homes, Homes would be how maybe you'd spell it in English. So so wine's in the Bible, man. It was cool to take it. So there you go.
There you go. That's your story, and you're sticking to it.
I'm sticking to it, man. All righty. So we're in, some would call the scene 4, act 4 of the second chapter of Ruth. There's all these various things that are happening. Let me start with verse 20. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. She's talking about, may the Lord bless Boaz, because he's just been so compassionate and kind, and things are showing up. So Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Now that's going to be interesting. She added, the man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers. Then Ruth, the Moabitess, okay, I guess is the best way to say it, said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they've finished harvesting all my grain. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. She's got full-time employment is what it looks like.
Yep.
She's got protection.
Yeah, her mother-in-law's telling her, look, you found a safe haven here with a member of our family, so don't chance it. He's being good to us. Just go back, right? Yeah. Bless him and go back. Yeah. And with age comes wisdom, I think, in this case. And Naomi reads the signs here and knows spiritually this is a good thing. This is sent from God. This is provided by God. God's providing for them food where they're kind of living day to day here and kind of in dire straits, as I said last broadcast. So go with what God's given us.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Now, I did pick up in what I just read, it sounds like his servants, his harvesters, were primarily female out in the field. So I originally read the story thinking that, it didn't necessarily need to be there, but...
Right, I thought both maybe.
Yeah, but in this case, it's like stay close to other women. Maybe she just meant he's providing a protection.
Could be both. Yeah, I think it's just that thing of don't, just be cool and do what's right here, and appearances have to be what, appropriate as well. And so hang with the women and don't, because I think too there could be, playing devil's advocate here, I guess a little bit, there could be those who would say, yeah, you know what, they're sidling up to Boaz because they're going to set him up here. They're just looking to weasel their way in here and or whatever. And she's like, no, just be appropriate. Be appropriate with your behavior. Do your work. We've been blessed here. Let's not, let's not take advantage of a situation where we've got a family member who's being very kind to us.
Yes.
Let's appreciate it and do what's right here.
Well, I thought it was interesting in verse 20 where Naomi said, Boaz has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Okay? When I did a little research through one of my commentaries about what is she saying? He hasn't stopped showing his kindness, because I'm thinking he hasn't, but why is she saying that? Okay. One of the studies said that the literal translation is he has not abandoned his hesed. In other words, he is not giving up on sharing a blessing. And so because of that, Naomi says, I need to lift him up to Yahweh. Now,
Right.
this is the lady who, remember, said, look, don't call me Naomi anymore because I'm bitter.
Right.
So all of this stuff is turning around her life. But then he's not only a blessing to the living, but he's blessing to the dead. Where I think she's going to go with this is that in the context of the story, Naomi and Ruth are the only surviving members, of this part that's being talked about, because Orpah is not in the story anymore, okay?
Correct.
But Naomi knows, her husband died, and so did her two sons. I'm thinking like Mahlon and Chilion, I think were their names. I probably didn't pronounce it right, but back in the beginning, remember the two sons that died?
Yep.
Okay, so I believe that what Naomi is saying is, this is a blessing for our whole family. And now, because he's a kinsman redeemer, because he's a family member, he might actually get to this bad situation turned around. And now they've got food, they've got a family again, they got protection, and we're going to find there may even be more than that.
Yep. Yeah,
Wow.
I think it's one of these situations that, and we've said this over and over again, it's just a prime example of how we should be behaving. Out of his abundance, Boaz blesses his family, and I think where she's going with the whole, those are living and the dead, he is taking his responsibilities to his kinswoman as kinsman redeemer very, very seriously. Very, very seriously. He's taking care of his family as he should, and as we should. Again, he's a great example of what we should all be doing, and so that's where I think she's going with it. We've talked about this law back in Deuteronomy about how this whole thing works if a woman dies and there are brothers or there are kinsmen, how it's supposed to all work. And it again, God does it for a reason. It's not being arbitrary here. He's saying, look, this is how things should be. You should be taking care of one another as I have taken care of you.
Yes.
So be the hands and the hearts and the minds of me while you're on the earth, while you're living. And this is what Boaz is doing. And that's where I think she's going with it.
Well, so here's another piece. I just went back to chapter 1. It's around verse 8 and verse 9, where Naomi is at a point where she's praying that Yahweh is going to bless Ruth with family and give her a husband. Since her husband died, she's a young woman. Naomi's saying, I'm done.
Right.
I'm going back home. I'm not going to ever have children. I'm too old. You can't sit around and wait. So why don't you just go back and find yourself a Moabite husband? And so she, in a sense, she does pray and ask that Ruth will go find a husband, have some kids, and fulfill what we know you're supposed to be doing. Okay? But what Naomi is finding out now is that Yahweh has answered or is answering her prayers.
Just not in the way she thought.
Not even close.
No, I don't think so.
In an option that she didn't even think was there.
Right.
She's
Yeah,
got this at least potential encounter coming. We know the story.
I think she
as it
was led to go
continues.
back. I think she was led to go back home. I think, there's, again, these rules are in place for a reason. And so she's like, okay, we came here for food, and now not only is there no food, but there's no husband, there are no sons. I've got to do something. And again, I said this last, neither one of them sat and waited for God to just drop manna out of the sky.
Yeah.
May have prompted them to go do something as
Sit
he
and
prompted.
mope and see what happens.
Yeah, he's prompted many people to do many things throughout Scripture. And I'm sure this is probably a prompting as well. And it's a prompting of Ruth to go. And I wonder how much of this had to do with what Ruth saw in Naomi and her husband Elimelech, as far from a faith perspective. Because there are gods, plural, from a Moabite perspective. Right. And she says to Naomi, your God will be my God. So what did she see in Naomi and Elimelech and her husband, who was their son, to say there might be something more to this than I thought or I realized. And so that could play a part in this as well. And look at how this is all playing out now.
Yeah. Well, so here's another level. The kinsman, at least that word in the ancient language, and what they would have understood in the day would have said there was some kind of a relative who's going to at least help part of the responsibility of not just the economic, well-being of a family member, but potentially take them in at a time of trouble and need. Okay, and in the word kinsman, in some of the what's called etymology, where you study the word, it means to buy back those who have sold themselves into slavery. Or it's used in that context is probably a better way to say it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the kinsman is involved in some kind of bringing justice when injustice has been around, let's say, a bad lawsuit. There's another place where the kinsman has a level of solidarity with a family or a clan or a relative, and they're supposed to do it. It's a custom of redemption. Now, that's why I was saying earlier in another broadcast that I see the work of Jesus, the ultimate Redeemer, but I see the foreshadow of how Boaz comes in, and he's being used by God to bring some wholeness and some health into a family and the relationships and bring things back to fruit, okay? But I'm thinking about today's local church. When you're talking about a relative and a responsibility when there's a crisis, does the church, per se, help the other members of the body of Christ? Now, we're not talking about just haphazard, throwing out money and supplies you don't have, but do we and are we called to help take care of those in a crisis if they really are part of our body of Christ relative family? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think we're also called to help those outside. The question is, do we?
Right, but do we?
Do we?
Yeah.
Do we
follow this story, he's following the kinsman redeemers.
Right, yeah. And do we just do what the church is called to do, which is take care of those in need, right? Early church.
Yes.
Everybody brought everything, laid it all at the feet of the apostles, and nobody in want remained in want. Everybody had enough. Is that what we're doing? No. I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. So now check this out. I liked your answer of both, because when the story began, Ruth is an outsider. Mm-hmm. Not only, yes, she is. She's totally an outsider. She's a Moabite. They don't know
because she
her.
has no tie now.
None.
She has no tie.
None. Exactly.
Yeah, Naomi's her mother-in-law, but her husband's dead, so there really is no obligation. Right.
Which is why Naomi said, just go back to your land. We're done.
Yeah.
Okay, we're out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so actually, it began by helping an outsider, revealed to be an insider. How many people do we think, well, I'm not going to help them because they don't confess Christ? And how many people do confess Christ that may not even actually be in the household of faith?
Well, how many people that Christ died for? Everybody.
Everybody.
But including those that drove the nails in. That's why I think he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Mm-hmm. He died for everybody who chose. He died for everybody, and it's up to us to make the choice. Yeah. So why then do we think we get to pick and choose who we help and who we think is worthy and who's not worthy?
Well said.
Where's that come from?
Judgment.
Well,
doesn't it? Yeah. I mean,
among other things.
Yeah, but we do have to have the Spirit of God leading us. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can use your resources inappropriately.
Pearls before swine in some
exactly.
sense.
Yeah, in one sense. Mm-hmm. Now, Deuteronomy 25, 5-10, I'd recommend our audience look that up in their Bibles. There was a custom that was called the Levirate marriage in Israel, that they actually would, let's say, for example, you've got a woman who's a widow, and then you've got a brother that comes over and marries. The object is to keep the bloodline continuing, to have more children, father offspring, or take care of offspring that maybe were born. Now, so in this story, we have a dead son-in-law. We have Naomi's husband, and then we have Boaz, who's not going to necessarily follow what I'm going to say, the letter of the law to a T, but the spirit of the law is clearly here. And that's where I think we need to think about as a church, do we get too legalistic and miss opportunities, or can we walk in the spirit as we're called to, and then to be able to be a blessing in ways that would be amazingly surprise us, which is what I think this story is all about.
So what you're saying, it's not always black and white, which will disappoint me greatly.
Because you're pretty black and white in a lot of ways.
Guy. So I have a question for you. So the guys and gals that you see standing on the corners here throughout town, how do you deal with them? Do you give them money? I
give them a lot less money than I ever had in my past. Okay.
Why now? Why is that changed?
Yeah, mostly what I do now is pray. When I see them, I feel like God tells me to pray.
Right.
Interesting enough, because we have a feeding ministry here, I end up knowing a lot of them. So depending on my schedule, I will pull over walk up to them and say, hey, I was driving by and I saw you. How you doing, Bill or Susie? And they're always stunned. They're stunned. And a lot of times I don't do anything but say, hey, let me say a prayer for you, or don't forget we're up on Wednesday night. Occasionally, there's been a couple of them. One guy was over by Safeway, not too far from here. And I handed him $10 and I said, I don't know what you're going to do with this money.
Right.
And I know the guy has a problem with some addiction. But I said, I'm giving you the 10. Looks like you lost a little weight since the last time I saw you, and I'm hoping you to go in and find some real food. And he goes, you have my word on it. And I was like, well, but I'm not doing it to judge you.
Right.
Mostly I want to tell you I love you. I prayed for you, and then I left. But my relationship might be a little different because I've interacted with him.
Right. Right, because Boaz doesn't, and again, the vices available now were not available back then at some level.
Correct.
But Boaz doesn't question; he just does.
He just does.
He just does, and he does it gladly. And
So
that's I struggle with those people on the corners and stuff.
But now I do some things on the inside, like you've asked me before, like, hey, Pastor Doug, did you know that this person's got a real struggling need here at the church? And I'll say, oh yeah, I knew it. And you say, well, is the church doing anything? And, a lot of times that isn't open information. And I say, yeah, we had some money in a benevolence fund and we took care of it. And you're like, sweet.
Right.
You just hope. What I wish is that our church would follow the promptings of the Spirit without having to first see the need and start building a heart of prepared for when God sends them. I think if we're more prepared, He'll send. But I don't know, does that make sense?
So we're a little reactionary rather than proactionary?
Correct.
You know? Yeah, I get it. Proactive. Yeah, no, I get it. Well, I think we do need to be, but I think it's got to start with the heart, though. I think that when we do see those people in difficult situations, we do make a judgment. Right? We
really do.
If I give this guy $5, is he just going to turn around, buy a cheap 6-pack and go get hammered?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
$5 is a cheap 6-pack around
well,
here.
I know.
You're absolutely right.
But right, or whatever that may be. And I don't know, because I struggle with it on the sense of, because Jesus said, whoever asks, give. Right? When, they ask for your shirt, give them your coat as well. That kind of thing. So how do you get your heart to the place of where Boaz is, where, and again, it's family, so it's a little different, I think, than what we're talking about. But there is that example in Boaz of just not even thinking twice about it. Here's a family member. She's in trouble. Here's what we're going to do.
Right.
And not only am I going to do it, servants, here's how you're going to act. Here's how you're going to go through the field. You're going to leave food behind for her.
Right.
So she's got plenty. And leave her be. Do not hassle her. Do not give her a hard time.
Yep.
She's under my wings of protection here. Done. Move on. Here we go.
Right.
And I don't know how to, you got to practice that. You don't just turn that on and off.
No, I don't think
you got to
exactly.
really practice
so
that.
I think each situation has to be what God calls you to, and you got to know His voice. I'll make this kind of a closing thought for me is that I look at Boaz, for example, and I think, man, he is one blessed dude. This guy has got so much going on. And my theological understanding is that God knew that Boaz would use his resources wisely. And so they were prepared. They did have a field. They did have a team. There was the provision. It was the fulfillment of Naomi's prayer. But there was a test for Naomi's heart, and she had to get through the test. There was a test for Ruth. Would she actually engage the work, or would she go into, the poor victim me type role in the middle of her test? There was a test for the other workers that said, will we let an outsider come in and share in the blessings, or will we keep it all to ourselves? And then I think there's a test that the bitterness that was starting to take root in Naomi's life, it died a slow death. Her husband died a death, and her sons died a death. But the bitterness died a slow death. But the healing of the sovereignty of God and the instrument of a faithful man like Boaz is what brought the bitterness to death. And now we're going to see the fruit. And as the story continues, we're going to see more and more fruit. And I hope that all of us can take this story and say, how does this apply to me? Can I look in the mirror on this one and see what it tells me about the compassion and the grace of God? and the compassion, the grace, and the mercy that's supposed to be revealed and shared from his children.